Hi again. This is the third video to continue with this week's lesson on English pronunciation. We left off at slide 9, so what you need to do is go to slide 10 and then we will begin. Ready? Okay. So far we have said that consonants in general, well, first of all, that consonants by definition are sounds which include an obstruction of the air flow that comes up from the lungs into the larynx. Okay, so that's a consonant. Now, consonants are described using 3 features so that every single consonant sound has to be described in terms of these features. The first one, which we talked about in the previous video, is voicing. So consonants have to be either voiced or voiceless, and we already explained that. Here we're going to be talking about the second feature, which is place of articulation. Place of articulation is the exact place at which sounds are produced. But in understanding place of articulation, the first thing that we need to look at is the difference between oral sounds and nasal sounds. Although all sounds are produced in the oral cavity, which means the mouth, the air in producing each sound might be expelled either out the oral cavity or out the nasal cavity. Let's read what this slide says. It says, in the production of sounds, air passes either through the oral cavity or through the nasal cavity, depending on whether the nasal passage is blocked off or not. In other words, if you look at the picture on the right says oral articulation. Oral articulation refers to sounds which obviously are produced in the oral cavity, but also sounds in which the air is expelled out the oral cavity or the mouth. If you look at this picture, you see that above the arrows that show the airflow, there is a gray area that is blocking the wall, the pharyngeal wall, and it's blocking the air from being expelled out the nose. Those are oral sounds. In sounds in which, that you can see in the other picture, which is the picture on the left, you see that this area, which is called the velum, is lowered. Therefore, the air can be expelled out the nose. For example, oral sounds are most sounds, such as t, p, s, f. The air is expelled out the oral cavity. But in sounds such as and the air is not being expelled out the oral cavity. It is being expelled out the nasal cavity. Those are nasal sounds. Now, articulators are the parts of the mouth that can be used to form sounds. Some articulators are active articulators, as you will see next, because they move, whereas some articulators simply stay there and serve as contact for the active articulators to establish contact against and then yield specific sounds. Okay, since this word is a little bit complex, let's pronounce this word. Let's listen and repeat. Okay, articulation, articulation, place of articulation. Let's also pronounce oral cavity, cavity, oral cavity, nasal cavity, nasal, nasal cavity. And another word is articulators, articulators, articulate. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Like I said, articulators might be active or passive. Articulators that form the lower surface of the mouth, in other words, the lower portion of your oral tract, are first the lower lip, your lower teeth, the tongue and all of its parts. So the tongue, if you look at the tongue from front to back, we have first the tip and blade, which are the most mobile parts of the tongue. Then we have the front, which is the area behind the blade, so immediately after the tip or blade of the tongue, and it lies underneath the hard palate. The hard palate, as we will see, is the bony, hard structure that is at the roof of the mouth. Then we have the center of the tongue, which is partly beneath the hard palate and the soft palate, which is a little behind. The back of the tongue, which is beneath the soft palate, and the root, which is opposite the wall of the pharynx. Okay, I will show you this in more detail on the next slide. Then we have the epiglottis, which is attached to the lower part of the root of the tongue, and then the lower jaw. Okay, these articulators often move towards those in the upper surface. Therefore, they're referred to as active articulators. So obviously, we don't move the top articulators. We don't move our upper jaw or our upper teeth. What we do move is the lower articulators. In other words, the lower jaw, the lower teeth, and then of course the tongue. Those are the mobile parts. Okay. Again, so we have the lower lip, the lower teeth, the tongue, the epiglottis, and the jaw as lower articulators. On slide 12, we see a picture. Of course, this picture, like I don't know if I said this before, but these pictures I took off of Google, and they're not exactly what I want them to be. But at least here we can see that it shows you the parts of the mouth. So we see that if we look at let's just focus on the lower portion of the vocal tract. So we have the jaw, the lip, the lower lip, okay, the tongue with its parts, and if we see the numbers, so number 1 is the tongue tip, number 2 is the blade, number 3 is the center of the tongue, number 4 is the back, and then we have, of course, the lower teeth, which are also part of the lower articulators, as well as the epiglottis. Okay, let's look at the next slide. On the next slide, we have that articulators that form the upper surface of the mouth are as follows. Obviously, the upper lip, the upper teeth, and immediately behind the upper teeth, we have what is called the alveolar ridge. A ridge is, if you think of like a set of mountains, at the surface of the earth, a mountain ridge is a series of mountains that look like this, like a wave, okay? That's a ridge. So immediately behind the upper teeth, if you feel with the tip of your tongue, you will feel that it feels like a ridge. That's called the alveolar ridge. The majority of sounds in the world languages are produced at the alveolar ridge. So again, what is the alveolar ridge? It's the small protuberance right behind the upper incisors. Then we have the hard palate. If you are to feel with the tip of your tongue, first, the alveolar ridge, which is immediately behind your upper teeth. If you move your tongue a little bit backwards, then you feel the hard palate, which is the hard surface bony structure of the mouth, the bony structure that forms the front part of the roof of the mouth. Then we have the soft palate. If you continue feeling with your tongue, first the alveolar ridge, then the hard palate, and if you go farther back, you would feel it soft. That's the soft palate, okay? The soft palate is the soft muscular flap that rises to press against the back wall of the pharynx and shuts off the nasal tract, preventing the air from going out through the nose. It separates the oral cavity from the nasal cavity. Now, if you were to touch the soft palate with your finger, you would gag because it would make you want to throw up, okay? Then we have the uvula. The uvula is the little thingy that hangs, the little appendage or small appendage that hangs down in the back of the mouth, okay? And finally, the back wall of the pharynx, in other words, the part of the vocal tract between the uvula and the larynx. Those are the upper articulators, okay? Again, the upper lip, the upper teeth, the alveolar ridge, the hard palate, the soft palate, the uvula, and the back wall of the pharynx. Let's say some of these words that might be challenging for you. First, upper, upper. Then alveolar, alveolar, alveolar ridge, ridge. Hard palate, palate. Soft palate, uvula, pharynx. Okay, let's look at slide 40. Here we have yet another picture, and I want you to look at the picture at the top right side of that of this slide, and it is kind of an extraction of the upper articulators. So we see that we have the upper lip, the upper front teeth, the alveolar ridge, the hard palate, the soft palate, and the uvula. And you can see that the uvula can raise to block the airflow so that the air doesn't go through the nasal cavity, or it could be lowered. Okay? And then, of course, in this picture, we also have the parts of the tongue and the lower articulators, which are here as a review. We already talked about them. Let's look at slide 15. Okay, like I said, articulators are the parts of the mouth that are involved in the production of sounds. Articulators move to different points or places of articulation. In other words, places in the mouth at which the contact with the articulators takes place, and as a result, we have sounds. Okay, we have primary and secondary articulators. Primary articulators are articulators that move. In other words, active articulators. The active articulators are those that constitute the lower part of the mouth, the lower lip, the tongue and all of its parts, and the back of the tongue. Of course, the lips, not only the lower lip, but also the upper lip, are considered primary articulators because they are used in the production of all sounds. If we look at slide 16, we see that place of articulation then, in short, refers to the place of contact where an obstruction occurs in the vocal tract between an active, in other words, a moving articulator, typically some part of the tongue, and a passive or stationary articulator, typically some part of the roof of the mouth, such as the hard palate or the soft palate. Of course, those parts do not move. On slide 17, we have yet another picture of the oral tract. And here we see very clearly that the lower jaw, the lips, and the teeth are greatly involved in the production of sounds. Of course, we also have the tongue and all of its parts. And then the parts of the mouth that constitute the upper surface of the mouth, or the passive articulators. Again, the alveolar ridge, the hard palate, and the soft palate. Let's look at slide 18. Here, we actually start talking about specific sounds in detail, okay? We're going to actually talk about this on the next video, just to make sure that I'm able to upload these videos and don't make them too long, okay? I'll see you in a second.